Hello, how are you? How's it going for you all? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to The Dome, this general interest interview program covering some of the most important topics of our daily lives, which we regularly discuss here at The Dome on Vibra Studio TV. You already know you can follow us at Vibra Studio TV on all social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, X, Twitch, YouTube, and of course also on our YouTube channel. The contact WhatsApp number is 1173731038. Well, today we're going to talk about a topic we left pending from Monday. A topic that's truly not just important, but widespread. When I say widespread, I could even say it's almost pandemic. And when I say pandemic, obviously I'm referring to what was the recent COVID pandemic around the world. Right then, why exactly are we going to sit down and talk about this particular topic here in the year 2026, and specifically in this month of June? Well, it is because there was a significant court ruling recently in the province of Córdoba that could perhaps be the major trigger for what might happen next regarding the many doubts and persistent questions about the experimental COVID vaccines. Just think about how much has been said over the years about these vaccines, whether they were truly experimental, whether they were actually good for us or not, and whether they had any serious long-term side effects. Even when that is the case, faced with such intense fear, the vast majority of people, I'm not saying they immediately ran straight out of the door, but the very first thing they did was try to get a vaccine, regardless of any other concerns they might have had. Regardless of which specific laboratory it came from or what rigorous process that vaccine might have gone through, and to get it injected because of the overwhelming sense of fear caused by COVID-19 in people in every corner of the globe. Usually, vaccines are synonymous with health, but of course the big question here is, what did people actually inject themselves with? I have drive, I'm a lion. Marcela Sangorrín, she's a biologist, a CONIC researcher, and holds a degree in biological sciences. And why am I going to greet her and introduce her? Because she is one of those rare individuals who has been able to, and has actually done, absolutely remarkable and groundbreaking research on the complex chemical components of the COVID vaccines. Hello, Marcela. This is Federico Lozana speaking. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Well, if you like, I can tell you a bit about how we started those studies as a result of... Firstly, everything that happened in 2020 as a biologist and researcher really caught my attention because nothing made sense. Never in my life had I seen anything like it. In our own homes, I think we've forgotten what happened to us. And some might say, why do you keep bringing all this up? It's already over. No, because it could happen again, and we mustn't let ourselves be deceived again. Because with the fear campaign that was generated by most media outlets worldwide, unscientific and harmful measures were taken. Because quarantining healthy people was never a policy for anyone. If there was a disease, I don't know, even back in the time of Jesus, well, they would leave the lepers outside the villages, but still, it was the sick who were isolated, not the healthy. Sometimes I can't fathom how we ended up there, how the fear campaign, even though it was worldwide and full of lies, started by taking away our basic freedoms.
Let me make a parenthesis here, Marcela, because this is something that was talked about a lot as well, wasn't it? They said yes, then no, that it wasn't quite like that, but that it could end up being so. I mean, if there was something we lacked during the pandemic, it was doubt, and doubt in every sense. When you say orchestrated campaign, does it have a name and surname?
Well, as for the real orchestrators, you simply don't know their actual names or their specific surnames. What comes out instead is, I don't know, influential intermediary powers and organizations like the World Economic Forum, Bill Gates, or Elon Musk, and all those powerful people. They actually held Event 201 back in October 2019, the previous year, to meticulously plan exactly how their wealth, the global economy, and the distribution of trade would end up if they were to deliberately create a global pandemic event. In reality, they've been orchestrating it from before, but they even did a drill, a well-known event to control power over the economy, and the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and there's less and less of a middle class. They saw that the equation worked out, and when I heard Rothschild speak once, he said, "For me, if business makes money, it's business. I don't care about the end result." In other words, the end justifies the means. And that's terrible, because these are powers that I won't claim to know, because it's impossible. They are some of the puppeteers who control the other puppets, who are our rulers, from every country and every political party. Because here too, there was no issue between left, right, or totalitarianism. All countries, some more than others, follow the orders because they are the ones who run the world, the economy. And if they didn't comply, they wouldn't receive any future loans or potential commercial deals. And well, everyone obeyed something that made no sense at all. And we know there were many staged recordings. Just like today. That's why I say we should always come back to the present day with all this business about the antivirus, Ebola, that they're going to require vaccines to go to the World Cup. You realise it's the same procedure, the same threats and scaremongering about things that aren't really like that. And furthermore, well, it's also scientifically established and proven that all illnesses are also influenced by emotions, by thoughts. Health is a holistic field that has a wide variety of different aspects. So if you frighten me, don't let me leave my house. I can't go to work to support my family. I can't see my grandparents. That is going to make me ill, regardless of whether there's a virus or not, or even if the power of the 4G and 5G antennas has increased. Well, there are a vast multitude of different factors that led to people falling ill, and all of the intense pressure and coercion that there was as well, insisting that only a vaccine would save us. And that's clearly not the case, because COVID at the time was simply another strain of the seasonal flu, one of many flus that humanity has successfully survived throughout history. I'm telling you this from the perspective of evolution as a biologist. We've survived major disasters, situations without heating, without drinking water. And humanity has always survived. And it's a lie that we only lived until we were 30. And that thanks to vaccines, we now live until we're 80 or 90.
Okay.
It's a lie.
And without so many vaccines, humanity survived without so many vaccines, because there simply weren't as many vaccines as there are today.
Nowadays, with vaccines, we need to have some historical perspective, of course, because I'm 60 years old, tend to think they've always existed. Vaccines only started about 100 and something years ago, with the influence of Rockefeller, with the beginnings with Pasteur and all that pharmaceutical industry, which ended up displacing the medicine that already existed. But let's not believe that medicine started with the pharmaceutical companies. There were already ways. Obviously, medicine has advanced a great deal in surgery in many areas, but there were ways to heal. Yet they banished all that ancient wisdom. As well as from different countries, from China, from India, and from the West, all the medicine that existed was banished. They campaigned against it to eliminate that wisdom and impose the idea that everything had to come in a little bottle, a pill, or an injection, and that this was the modern way to cure. No, that was also an orchestrated campaign managed by the universities. They controlled the training. of medical doctors and dedicated scientists exerting influence through financial means, because as everything is maintained and kept afloat by subsidies or foundations that support research, well, it's not as if we operate in a vacuum or thin air. That is to say, there are significant financial interests that fund certain studies and specific projects. So that influences the development of pharmaceuticals and our dependence on them.
I agree. I completely agree with everything you're describing. There are probably a lot of people on the other side who might not believe it. And let me ask you about the empirical side of things, about what can be proven. Now, we're going to get into the details of the contents of some vaccines from certain laboratories. However, before we proceed, I would first like to ask you exactly what kind of role the World Health Organization played, given that the vast majority of countries trust its guidance on health matters. I mean, what role did they play throughout the pandemic?
Well, it was a disaster. Firstly, because I talked to a lot of people, and many of them aren't aware that the World Health Organization isn't a democratic body like the OAS or a democratic organization. In reality, it's the foundation that is 80% or more funded by the pharmaceutical companies. So they answer to the interests of those who give them money. Yes, countries send representatives, but it's really just to keep themselves informed. Countries sometimes contribute as well. Now, there are countries that are pulling out and have stopped contributing. But the main funders are the pharmaceutical companies. They do whatever the pharmaceutical companies tell them to do. It's not an independent body. But unfortunately, countries obeyed the WHO, making people believe it was a democratic organization when it isn't. And on top of that, they said the worst things. They said, we suggest that people don't go out to work. We suggest wearing masks. We suggest not doing autopsies. How are you supposed to know what a new disease causes, why people are dying, if you don't do autopsies? They banned autopsies. But what I'm telling you is that many times, that's the terrible thing, the consequences. Do you understand? Because you don't know what people actually died of.
Well, many of the deaths reported in Argentina and around the world were said to be from COVID. But were they really from COVID? No, nobody knows because nothing was done.
Well, now you know why. If you don't carry out an autopsy with a forensic expert, you don't know what someone died of. But thanks to rebellious blood, to Italian blood, which many of us have, right? I have Italian and Basque blood. It's an explosive combination. The Italians, a group of doctors led by Dr. Bacco, secretly, in hiding, carried out autopsies, more than 400 autopsies. And there they discovered in 2020 to 2021 that in fact the treatments suggested by the WHO, specifically the use of ventilators, were terrible. That's what killed people, because it was like giving them oxygen and fire and we set them alight, said Drive Bacco, because of course the capillaries in the bronchi were closed, and so the air couldn't get through and they forced air in, they forced in oxygen. It's as if we killed them, we set them alight from the inside.
To those already ill with the COVID virus?
Of course, those ill with that chain of symptoms they called COVID. Yes, which is a list of 20 or 30. Everything was COVID, you see. And on top of that, they admitted you to hospital and did a PCR test, the famous test that was completely non-specific, which is random. It's not suitable for determining if someone is ill. It's used to detect a small fragment of DNA, and that carries a huge margin of error depending on how it's done. And in this case, it was done with 40 cycles. Well, I'm not going to bombard you with data, but scientists know it was done incorrectly. That's what infuriates me. Many doctors don't know about molecular biology, but we scientists do. That it was done with 40 cycles. Believe me, that gives completely erroneous results. It's totally random. That's why, from your own experience, there were people with symptoms who went to get tested and got a negative result, and people with symptoms who tested positive, and vice versa. In other words, it was also a tool for lying and also for creating that crazy idea of the asymptomatic person. When has there ever been a disease with no symptoms? That's the very foundation of medicine. To discover illness through symptoms and signs. This is an art that doctors have always cultivated, and now, for several decades, they've been pushing this idea that you can be ill without symptoms or without any test being able to detect it.
Eso es una falacia, ¿no?
Yes, a complete fallacy, a whole package. They also changed the definition of pandemic, and they also changed the definition of vaccine. Because vaccines nowadays, to touch on what you wanted about the studies we did, are no longer the ones we knew 30 or 50 years ago. I can tell you myself that up until 2018, I had the yellow fever vaccine, or I vaccinated my children when they were little. It's not that I'm, as they say, anti-vaccine on principle. What made me start questioning and wanting to find out what was in the vaccines was all this nonsense about utterly ridiculous things with no common sense that we experienced in 2020. In fact, they were so clumsy, and they think we're so stupid that it backfired on them. Because what can you believe about this list, which is missing loads of things we should go over to realise that none of what they forced on us made any sense?
But look, it would be so contradictory and funny that you, being a doctor, a researcher, and knowledgeable about vaccines, would be anti-vaccine. Anyone who thinks you're anti-vaccine while being on the inside, it's like saying, hey, the person who's cooking in the kitchen, don't they want to eat the food? Because they don't know what's in it or because it's rubbish. And they will probably say, no, hang on. If they're cooking, it is generally assumed that the food they're going to serve is actually edible. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, if you're saying that...
Nowadays, with the internet, everyone can look up what my experience is. Well, I have 35 years of experience between the university and UNICEF. And actually, my experience is in biochemistry, proteins, enzymes, and yeast microbiology. That's my speciality. I'm not a vaccine specialist.
Let's see.
They gave me the third round of vaccines 6 years ago because of all this, because of my critical spirit or my common sense. Because, as I say, you didn't need to be a scientist to realise everything we're talking about. There were loads of people who hadn't even finished secondary school who also realised, because instead of being glued to the telly or the radio, they thought for themselves and made connections. And they also realised it was a lie. It's not necessary.
Wait,
Prompted me to study because absolutely none of it made sense.
Yes, but beyond your specialty, you were analysing the contents of the vaccines? I mean, do you understand the subject? It's not the same as if I look at them as a journalist and I say, what the hell am I looking at?
Yes, of course, most certainly. We, together with Licentiate Lorena de Blasi, who also works, well, we're from two different CONICT institutes at the same university here in Neuquén capital. That's where we met. And with all these doubts and that we were questioning, well, after meeting people, doctors and nurses, who were seeing the adverse effects in people, some from the very first day of vaccination, others after 15 days, others noticing how illnesses increased, all the conditions that rose from 2021 onwards, and the deaths, everything that... In 2022, these professionals, both from Neuquén and other provinces, brought us vials, knowing that we had the capacity to analyse them, also basing ourselves on studies that already existed in Europe. In Australia, in Canada, and, well, as I previously pointed out to you in detail in some of the slides I sent, as far back as the year 2021, in Spain and in England, particles containing graphene dioxide or graphene oxide had already been successfully detected and identified, particles that were studied with specific methods like micro-Raman in order to precisely determine exactly what each individual particle is made of, that were found in the vaccines. That was one indication, and there were other studies carried out in Argentina as well, also in the city of La Plata, where metallic elements were detected, undeclared elements that should not be present in a vaccine. Those studies This prompted us to begin a thorough investigation, first through the use of fluorescence microscopy, into the specific samples we obtained from vials of various different brands of vaccines, and to see for ourselves that these particles were also composed entirely of graphene, or of graphene oxide, however you might prefer to call it.
What is graphene oxide and what effect can graphene oxide have on the body? Because it's also good for people to perhaps know about this.
Of course. Graphene oxide is a molecule used for many nanotechnology applications, in electronics, in all sorts of things, paints, because it has impressive physical and chemical properties. It's about 1,000 times stronger than steel, it's conductive, it can bond with many molecules, it has loads of capabilities, but it is not approved for use in living beings. It's not approved because, being so incredibly thin and remarkably strong, as I previously mentioned, it can act almost like tiny little chili flakes and physically cut through or severely damage individual cells in a wide variety of different tissues throughout the body. It is not currently approved, nor was it ever listed in the officially declared chemical compositions of the pharmaceutical companies. So its toxicity hasn't been studied, because in fact it's already known to be something very dangerous, and it wasn't approved for use in humans, but it was found.
Sorry, did you find this when you analysed some of the vaccines from the different laboratories? So is it confirmed that this was inside the vaccines people were being injected with?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, it is not just us, I tell you. Other researchers over in Germany, across in Spain, and right here in England have actually discovered, well, believe it or not, there they are showing some images now, but I had specifically told them if they wanted to skip some of those, they found these particles with unusual and complex compositions, with metallic substances or undeclared elements. That is to say, those particles, here we can see some photos, there you have graphene oxide, which is a flat molecule made up of carbon and oxygen. And these earlier research papers are the ones I was mentioning to you earlier, where chemical elements have already been identified and documented. That is,
That shouldn't have been there. Right.
exactly, in the composition. Because, for example, according to what the companies said, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Moderna, the 6 companies whose products were sold in Argentina, some said they contained messengers, others adenoviruses, both kinds of molecules. Well, that should have simply resulted in the typical elements of life: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, a bit of magnesium. But during our detailed investigations at the chemical level, in terms of the specific chemical composition of the various elements, we found that these atoms, the ones they normally declared, were actually not present at all. We discovered that there were traces of heavy metals. We found elements. Actually, it might be better not to include anything at all, because since it's not what I told you about, it's all becoming rather confusing for everyone.
All right, we'll select it now.
I said, if you wanted to choose some.
Go on. Which would be the most important of those images we were showing?
Yes, that's fine, but sometimes.
No, I mean, which are most important? The one about graphene, for example, or AstraZeneca and Moderna vaccine composition?
Of course. No, for example, there's one with a chart, a pie chart, colourful, round, where it's shown. The 6 brands were studied in Argentina, the ones that circulated in Argentina, using a technique called ICP-Mass, which is a high-precision technique that allows you to know which chemical elements, which atoms, make up a sample, the whole sample. It's digested, the molecules are broken down, and it tells you which chemical elements make them up, right? Within a range that can detect almost 95% of known elements.
I mean, it has 95% accuracy, that technique.
Of course. There we see, in the samples we analysed, 17 samples, it says there, the frequency. That is, in those 17 vaccine samples, what was it that we mostly found, you see? Cranium, boron. Oh, I can't read it because it's so small.
All the calceric products.
In green are the elements. Most of them had those elements. You see, those elements are not declared for. They weren't even declared by the pharmaceutical company, nor permitted for use in injectables. There are loads of elements, 55 undeclared chemical elements. Among them, the group I put there on the side in blue, which are called the metals.
Heavy metals.
Which were also present in almost all the samples. There was a variety of heavy metals. There are 17 samples in total, and there was a group, the data table. Do you remember that? The chemistry table from school.
Periodic table.
Of course, the periodic table.
There it is.
It shows a group. Well, there it's bigger, but look, it can't be that between 80% and 100%.
Boron, gallium, arsenic. They're all substances, if I'm not mistaken, that when they come into contact with humans, with blood, I imagine they're carcinogenic.
Exactly. Right. They're highly toxic. I mean, some aren't even classified for toxicity because it's quite unusual to assess these elements in the body.
Sorry, it's got gallium, it's got copper, gold. There, the violet section of the pie chart says gold, copper. And what would that be used for in a person's blood?
Actually, no. This is a phenomenon that we have discovered, but we are unable to explain it. Partly, these elements, we looked into it, I was going to say, a large part of the lanthanides, which is a group that's at the bottom of the periodic table. And those elements, which were surprising to find, are widely used in nanotechnology. They're used precisely to bind graphene with what are called functional groups. Nanotechnology applications, quantum dots for optogenetics. That is, there are experimental studies, there are papers, which I also included in a slide somewhere, but never mind, you can look it up. In online journals, this is already being used to create interfaces with the brain, interfaces with different organs, within the biological systems of mice or various laboratory test subjects, to effectively influence and modulate diseases and to exert control over specific behaviours. They tell you it's to cure Parkinson's and always try to sell it to you as if they're researching something good. But that also has a significant influence on biology. And there are certain individuals who adapt, who might be able to successfully receive it, to incorporate that technology. And there are people who can't tolerate all these elements, which are also forming particles. They're not loose, and it causes them an illness.
Because of?
A variety of different illnesses and relatively mild and insignificant arrhythmias.
In these elements they found. I already mentioned several: gold, copper. What worries me, for example, is that uranium and lithium were also there in the charts. Thank you. I mean, these metals are practically the sort of thing the Iranians would use to make a toxic bomb, aren't they? I mean, this is inexplicable.
Many people are saying, and it's not just me or the so-called conspiracy theorists, as they want to label us. Many are saying today in the European Parliament and in the United States Senate, representatives from those countries, from different parties, are saying that these are, in fact, chemical weapons. Chemical weapons have caught exactly what they want. Deep down, what is it that they want? For there to be fewer and fewer people, because Bill Gates already said he wanted to reduce the population by 10%. World population, because if there are fewer people, it's easier to control them. If there are fewer people, well, there are fewer people to defend the natural resources.
All of this is fully certified by a notary before the courts. I mean, it's been thoroughly proven. All the improper things that the vaccines contained, which you were able to detect in the laboratory. Here, we're not talking about the imagination of the people who got vaccinated, but about reality.
Of course. Yes. And besides notaries, we brought notaries along when we carried out the studies ourselves using the fluorescence microscope. But from there, we conducted 3 other major studies, one of which I mentioned to you, at other CONIC institutes. And at a private company where we paid for the service, it's like when you send a sample of your tap water to be analysed and pay an institute for it. Well, we sent them to be done at other places, where we have the reports signed by the technicians from those laboratories, which certify everything I'm telling you. The only thing is that we sent the samples, and then we wrote up the results, the tables, the graphs. We published it in Spanish, we published it in English, in Schumann, international journals, all that work. But it's not as if it was carried out by other technicians who did the studies. The worst part is that ANMAR didn't study anything. Since 2022, all these studies we've done weren't for appearing on radio shows. No, they were to protect the public. So in 2022, with the first analyses and through a remote procedure called OTAD, we submitted all this to the Ministry of Health, to ANMAT, so that they would take action and at the very least recall the batches we had studied, that's what it's called, remove them from the market or analyse the counter sample, which, well, they should have kept but don't have. ANMAT didn't do any of that. You've seen there have been other scandals in recent years, like the one with fentanyl. We notified them in 2022 and they didn't carry out any analysis. But this stems from the fact that the pharmaceutical companies also signed laws and contracts, secret contracts, and that they protected them, gave them legal immunity, meaning they weren't held responsible, there were no guarantees, and on top of that, Law 27,573 was signed in October 2020. And it's not as if our politicians didn't know. People went to testify and said that law was outrageous, that it was outrageous to sign secret contracts, and that, on top of it all, with secrecy,
about the particular contents.
In other words, the doctors didn't know the vaccine leaflets. Today we have them thanks to a doctor from Tucumán, Maria Eugenia Maldonado, who requested the leaflets through the courts. This is a big deal. It's a long story to tell. That is, they were sending people to get injected, and without the doctor's order, with an experimental vaccine because it wasn't authorized, it wasn't approved, it was only authorized for emergency use. It was a clinical trial. The president himself said so. It was stated in the Mi Argentina app. Experimental clinical trial. In other words, they told you straight to your face. So now, on top of that, they're responding to people who have been harmed, who are ill, who have taken legal action. Now, the courts and the Ministry of Health, what do they say to people who had to have a leg or an arm amputated, who were left with Guillain-Barré, with ALS?
Let me ask you this, Marcela. Just how many people died after being vaccinated and perhaps never even found out it was actually due to a stroke, a heart condition, sudden death, or some other cause triggered by these vaccines and their various components?
Of course, no one is targeted because there are illnesses that take 2 or 3 years to develop. Or after the body suddenly develops a turbo cancer, where in 2 months a terrible tumour forms, or arrhythmias, heart attacks, because all of this really affects the heart and the brain. The deaths of so many young athletes. I thought that when what happened to Kun Aguero happened, in a country so obsessed with football, I don't know what good it does us if we can't realise that an elite footballer who was in perfect health, who was transferred, he was in perfect health, obviously, he changed clubs and everything at that time. Now he's developed a heart condition. Since when? He had nothing wrong with him.
But how many times have I talked here on the programme about thinking that Sergio Kun Aguero, after spending 10 or 15 years at different clubs at the very highest level, undergoing rigorous medical checks all over the world, right? It really makes you wonder. I mean, maybe someone could have missed a heart condition he might have had. Let's say that's possible. But for a heart condition to suddenly appear after he's been through so many places and so many checkups, the only answer is, look, he got vaccinated and something in those vaccines caused it.
Yes. And, well, there are a lot of theories about why it happened to him and not to others. I can't say for sure, but...
Which vaccines are we talking about? Which vaccines from which laboratories were the most harmful? Or where did you find those 55 undeclared elements?
No, we found these undeclared elements in all of them. What happens is that in some, yes, 55, in fact 62, because the two overlapping techniques, ICP and electron microscope, found 62 in total. Across the 6 brands, they're present in all of them. They contain heavy metals. All of them have lanthanides. Maybe not all 12 heavy metals, but some have 4 or 5, others have a different 4 or 5. That is to say, but the overall distribution is the same. One might have 35 undeclared elements, another 40 in total. Altogether, all those found add up to 50 and 62 using both techniques. Well, this work... This research covers all the vaccines and is based on other studies that have also been carried out around the world using electron microscopy. But our ICP-Mass work is truly original. There are not many studies like it at all, where we discovered those 55 different elements distributed across the 6 brands. It is all available online. Well, there you have part of the results. All of these comprehensive studies are available for you to see on a specific website that, in addition to all of these various issues, we had to, because of censorship, we had to develop and launch our own website due to the ongoing levels of censorship.
Yes, I remember that any media outlet that mentioned the word COVID or pandemic was automatically censored, taken down. You couldn't see it.
Yes, now, I don't know why they've relaxed their approach a bit. Maybe they've got various other matters to attend to, I don't know. But now they don't remove our content as much. But we made a Google form, you know, those online survey forms, to record vaccine side effects. We care about people, don't we? We want to scare people.
Now, can I ask the following?
We want to be fearmongers now.
No,
because that's what they did. As I say, if a person is aware, they stop poisoning themselves, seek a healthy life, healthy food, try to eliminate these toxins by various methods. They should look for conscious doctors who can guide them.
Can toxins be eliminated?
Well, partly, yes. There are many treatments that are being evaluated. I don't want to talk about any one in particular because there are several, and I'm not the one to give advice. Seek out doctors. There are conscious doctors who are evaluating many treatments. The thing is, you need to know exactly what's inside, because if you don't know what you have, it's difficult to find the right treatment or check whether the treatment has done its job. Because if I don't know what I have inside me now, in my blood, or what I've been injected with, how am I supposed to know if a certain treatment has cured me if I don't know what to look for?
Marcela, I have.
We need to form interdisciplinary groups.
Sure.
But there are possibilities.
I have several questions. One of them has to do with maybe, even though I'm not a medical scientist or an expert on what an illness is or what the pandemic was, I often say to a lot of people, look, if you're still alive now after having been vaccinated, that's it. You probably won't have any problems. But, I mean, maybe it's not quite as simple as I put it, and perhaps those components that are still in the body could possibly trigger some illness or condition.
Of course, every person's different, and as we were saying, emotions, thoughts, everything plays a part for better or worse. The most important thing that you need to do is get a proper blood test, specifically to check for signs of thrombosis markers, and other related indicators. It's already officially recognized and documented by the World Health Organization and by CNASTBA.
The laboratories themselves admitted that some of the vaccines cause thrombosis. Yes.
Cancer rates are rising. Thrombosis is on the rise, but you don't see that making headlines in the newspapers. They're already admitting it and covering themselves, and that's why I'm telling you that now. When people take legal action, they cynically reply that everyone knew these were experimental. You knew they could cause adverse effects. That's a lie. Nobody knew, and everyone was coerced because also
They forced you, didn't they, to get vaccinated?
that the law said it wasn't compulsory. The COVID vaccine wasn't mandatory. It's not like the others.
No, but from government bodies, including the Ministry of Health, they'd say, do you want to travel? You have to be vaccinated. Show me your certificate. Do you want to do this or that? You have to be vaccinated. If not, you couldn't.
Yes, but you should ask them to put it in writing. They also said it in their regulations, but it's illegal. You could take action. If my employer told me they were going to leave me without a job, well, put it in writing. You see, because then if it's in writing, I can go to a lawyer and say, hang on, the law says that COVID vaccination is optional because it's for emergency use and it's an experimental vaccine.
Of course, but most people didn't know that. That's the problem.
But the same Me Argentina app told you that. It was an experimental clinical trial, and it was just a matter of doing a bit more research. They said Argentina was chosen for this trial, and if you were worried about your job or traveling, you could look up the law, get advice, and there it said it was optional.
Question. As a CONICET worker, you and many other colleagues who, in one way or another, have personally discovered these improper and undeclared components in the vaccines. Being a CONICET worker, which is part of the state health system, is that not the case? I mean, didn't anyone ever say to you at some point, well, thanks for everything, but you need to stop this. You can't stay at CONIC. You're causing trouble that's not appropriate.
That's why we're at. Firstly, there was never a written order, as I said, that you couldn't study the vaccines. Why? Because here it seems like it's a taboo word and that you weren't allowed to study it. When this paper came out in 2024, as we call research papers in English, it had such an impact, this study on the 55 elements, that the CONIC authorities reacted at that point. And they started proceedings against us. I don't know if you know. Ever since August of last year, there has been an internal administrative inquiry against Lorena de Blasi and me because of this detailed scientific research study for supposed irregularities, which they listed as the primary reason and the underlying cause. But in reality, this isn't actually sufficient grounds for such an inquiry. Scientific work is discussed with more science, more data, an interdisciplinary group. You did 17 samples, so let's do 100.
Of course.
And let's do more analysis. We want to seek the truth. We don't want to sweep the truth under the carpet. Instead of saying our work is preliminary, we said there was more work to be done, but it's a compelling sample of something, which is suspicious and does a great deal of harm. There absolutely needed to be more scientists working on it. We did this of our own accord, unrelated to our main line of work. in our own spare time. That is, putting in many extra hours at home, working outside our official duties, because we felt it was our ethical duty as scientists to contribute whatever we possibly could. In this, lawyers will contribute in their field, doctors in theirs. I had these tools to follow the work being done abroad and see what I could do, what we could do in Argentina or add to it. Well, we applied the tools we had and have in Argentina, but it seems that CONICET didn't like it. And now we're in the middle of a disciplinary process, with many witnesses having already testified between last year and this year. We're in that process. Because in reality, it's illegal, because it's not grounds for a disciplinary process.
Exactly.
No doubt.
It's research.
Science work.
Absolutely. Did you say it was in 2024, already under Javier Milei's government?
We started the studies in 2022.
Yes, I know, but was the disciplinary process in 24?
Yes, in fact, they were already actively working on it at the very beginning of 2025. Then, back in October 2024, the official publication finally came out in the prestigious American Journal. And they were developing it at the start of 25 within CONIC in what is called the Board of Directors, the Ethics Committee, which said that our work was not ethical, when in fact we did it out of professional ethics. But they say it's not ethical because our work means that people get vaccinated less, in a nutshell.
Right. No, but I'm asking, who was it that gave it this tone? Of punishment, shall we call it?
CONICET's board is a democratic body where we have representatives from society and from the scientific community. There is a president of CONICET who is Daniel Salamone. I don't know where the order came from. We actually first found out about it on the 25th of August last year. Actually, they've been working on it since March, but they never notified us. And in August, we asked, because all these pads we did, or all these studies, are also presented in these cases, which is what concerns us about people harmed by vaccines. After we filed our formal response to the TADs, and with CONICET replying that they were in the process of opening up an inquiry, well, in August, we discovered the situation. We requested a formal meeting or an audience with the president of CONICET and other representatives, but it was flatly refused. And then the inquiry was decreed from the 22nd of August last year.
Right, that's exactly why we're calling you, innit? Because it seems to me that here there could be a starting point for something that is already taken on a serious tone. Because when the courts get involved, it's no longer just a scientific investigation that each person can take or leave as they wish. I mean, here the Cordoba judiciary, through the federal chamber, determined that the death of a young woman was caused by the Sputnik vaccine. So, this has perhaps taken a new turn, hasn't it?
Yes, indeed. This is a very significant and important case where, for the very first time, it has been legally determined that the direct causal link to the death was the vaccine. However, there are also many other legal cases currently pending, such as the one on the slide I'm showing you now. And the next slide here shows that there are well over 2,000. It is impossible to know the exact number because we don't know all the lawyers currently handling vaccine damage cases.
Legal filings?
Yes, the legal filings. There's another one following that, which shows the case numbers, you see, from different provinces, civil cases, criminal cases. Because here, and due to the claim from, let's say, the money that was set aside, because that was the law they passed, that instead of the pharmaceutical companies paying, it will be the Argentine state that pays.
So the claim wouldn't be against the Sputnik laboratory in this girl's case, but rather against the Argentine state.
Yes, really. We have to be
Wow.
Argentine about it. You wanted to take it down the political route, but I'm telling you, it's the fault of all the parties because that law was passed in October 2020. Yes, where all the parties, all the MPs, who today are part of the executive branch, all voted in favour. And all continue with this policy of following these global mandates from the WHO and the pharmaceutical companies, who, as we know, fund all the media and all the political parties. That's why I said earlier that they're puppets and they're not defending the Argentine people. They're not defending any citizen because the same thing happens in every country. So, in this day and age, what many lawyers are actively demanding and insisting upon, not just from the Argentine state, but in various other cases too, is that all those responsible are brought to justice and held fully accountable, that the pharmaceutical companies pay their share, and that government officials and doctors are also held liable, regardless of whether these are criminal proceedings or civil lawsuits. The nurses.
Now, could what happened with these cases perhaps be interpreted legally as a crime against humanity already?
Cases have been filed. If you should ever find yourself wanting to interview the lawyer Julio Rosona from Mar del Plata, he is currently handling a very significant case where it is being pursued as a serious crime against humanity for poisoning the world's entire population. And if it is conclusively proven that this was carried out deliberately, it's not merely a few contaminated vials, it was deliberately done with a deeply sinister and malicious purpose. That means the clause of intent falls because they, the pharmaceutical companies, are protected as long as there is no intent, no intention to cause harm. Of course.
They call it eventual intent.
With these studies from so many independent scientists around the world, and there are more, with these cases, and there are already others in Europe and the United States that the pharmaceutical companies have lost, but it's not a matter of paying compensation, it's a matter of getting to the root of the problem and finding all those responsible. So if this amendment or the issue of intent falls, if there really was intent, then the cases are already prescribed.
Intent is a legal concept, of course.
Of course. So they don't expire because otherwise these things would expire in 3 or 4 years. It could go against them, even in 40 or 50 years, against the pharmaceutical companies, against the governments, against all those who orchestrated this.
Yes, and why is that? Because crimes against humanity, among a few others, are not subject to a statute of limitations. This is what you were saying, that there isn't a set period of time in which, if you haven't filed, you've lost your chance, but rather you can do it at any time.
The pharmaceutical companies already acknowledge, and the WHO, for example, that blood clots and thrombocytopenia in patients are caused by the COVID vaccines. It's already been acknowledged.
What a mess.
And well, this ruling is very important because it supports all the arguments being made worldwide. Besides her case, it also supports this, as CONACYBA, which is the Vaccine Safety Authority in Argentina, also acknowledges it. Since May 2024, they have also acknowledged that vaccines are the cause of these diseases, which has already been proven.
Yes, what happens is that CONACYBA, ANMAT, and other bodies that depend on the Argentine state either looked the other way or covered their eyes, and now they say, yes, it seems something slipped through. I mean, they're late to the party. Of course.
Yeah. We need to dismantle this whole apparatus of concealment, and all the people who have been harmed, everyone who has lost family members, must seek justice, whether through the courts, by sending emails, or by posting online. There needs to be social pressure so that, firstly, they never lie to us again, and secondly, that they pay for everything that happened.
I reckon that the most important thing in all of this that you are doing, beyond the matter of legal or financial claims, is that all of us who have lost a loved one, we're not going to get them back, and they are priceless. But what I do think is good about what you're sharing is that, hey, we need to be careful, stay alert, and not fall for the same old story if there's another new pandemic. Maybe it'll be hantavirus, maybe Ebola, or who knows what name they'll give it. I mean, we have to stay vigilant.
We really do have to stay vigilant because the way information is handled is just terrible. For example, they say there's a measles outbreak and there are 4 cases, 5 cases. And on top of that, the photos they show in the media, the pediatricians say that's not measles, that's chickenpox. They just use any old photo, give any old information, and blow things out of proportion. And besides, health isn't just about vaccines. I mean, when we were kids, no one died of measles either. I mean, you have to stay in bed, chickenpox, mumps. Yes, sometimes it hits you harder, sometimes milder. But what really matters is being in good health. What we should be striving for good health, is for people to eat well, have jobs, a decent roof over their heads, proper sewage, electricity. In other words, health depends on a whole range of other things. How can it be that I have to inject myself with something to complete my body? That doesn't make sense. What needs to happen is improving conditions.
I think so, I do.
Instead of poverty, what we need to avoid is poverty itself.
I also believe the following. Obviously, this is just my opinion, and it might upset some people. I think there is also some direct or indirect responsibility on the part of doctors, because doctors jump on the bandwagon of pills for this, pills for that, vaccines for this, vaccines for that. I mean, as I always say, a doctor is just like a mechanic. A doctor's just like a mechanic or a greengrocer. They need to work to get paid. If they don't have patients, I imagine they don't get paid. It's like a garage. If there are no cars to fix, they don't get paying.
Yes. Well, there are always going to be illnesses, for example, but there are different ways to cure them.
Quite.
There wouldn't be any patients left. But prescribing isn't the only way to cure people. And as we already know, the inanna, which is a way of saying it, is that the more they prescribe from a particular pharmaceutical company, at the end of the year, they receive
Medical representative.
Well, there are doctors who don't. There are many doctors who don't. But the vast majority and the big clinics and industries you see, how is it possible that they have so much money to build those buildings? Medicine's a fantastic business.
Without a doubt.
10 stories.
Look, in the last 10, 15 years, let's say as an average date, I see a huge number of people, older adults, who take out a plastic container they call a pill organizer with the days of the week, and in each day they've got 3 or 4 little pills, right? They're not really little pills, they're actually medicines, supposedly. I think it's impossible to be physically healthy and lucid and perhaps mentally aware if you're so heavily drugged up, in quotes, or so medicated. I mean, it's utterly complete madness.
It's madness, especially if you read the leaflets, the number of side effects they themselves list, and the combination of medicines where sometimes you don't even know the synergistic or counterproductive effects of taking so many things. And the doctors tell you, don't read the leaflet because it'll scare you. Well then, what are we doing? What are we doing? There are healthy people, for example, nowadays, who live in the countryside or in so many places without so many medicines and live just the same. All by using other types of medicine, they manage to heal themselves. And more people are turning to integrative medicine, alternative therapies, homeopathy. It's not that they're alternatives. In reality, they're other forms of medicine that have always existed, and as I said, with thousands of years of experience. And they exist and don't have so many contradictory side effects. Besides, we need to look for the cause of illnesses, not just treat the symptoms and end up on medication for life.
Marcela,
The cause, why do I have high blood pressure? Because, well, I try not to cover it up. I don't want to mask the blood pressure with medicines that might have loads of side effects that harm other organs.
absolutely. Marcela, well, we've talked quite a lot already. It's honestly been really productive. Yes, I know it's a lot. So, do you have a website or an Instagram where perhaps people who want to ask questions, get advice, and find out what all this is about can do so?
Yes. Well, I'm on Instagram or Facebook under my name, Marcela Sangorrín. And then we have the website I mentioned, which we had to set up because of censorship issues, called laresistencia.lib with a B. I've sent you the link there, laresistencia.lib. There you'll find the form to report vaccine-related injuries. And with that form, we already have more than 200 cases. This has served as vital information for legal professionals, and judges have contributed their own findings to it, because there we can correlate the batch number, the brand, and what specific medical conditions it's causing. We can find that the same batch for one person caused the same illness or another, but we can already see the incidence of different pathologies. And on the website, all our studies are also fully accessible to the public. They are complete for anyone who wants to download them or use them to present in court, at a school, or wherever you like. You can easily download and print the PDFs. There are also talks uploaded from various meetings and conferences on a range of topics that all have an impact, such as 4G and 5G antennas, radiation, and issues like climate manipulation or geoengineering. In other words, there are many aspects. It's everything that comes in this package of Agenda 2030 or now 2050. That's why we keep moving the goalposts, we keep shifting the boundaries. It is not that we are unable to do it, but rather that we need to channel our energy into truly productive pursuits, elevate our sense of spiritual awareness, move beyond our fears, and actively search for every possible tool to be well. We shouldn't let ourselves get depressed or sad. There are tools to help us move forward, but we have to look for them. Find the right doctors, the right dentists, and also lawyers who can help us clarify things. Well, on the website, you can get in touch and write to us directly. You see, there's also a dedicated group of professionals there, all of us working entirely pro bono in this service to help bring all this to light and to the truth. And little by little, the truth is finally coming out with all these cases. And there are other cases that are also quite advanced in Argentina and around the world. So yes, we need to overthrow all this great infamy and introduce a much more rigorous scientific approach. That is to say, let us truly get down to the business of investigating. Why can't they be analyzed? Why did he want to dismiss us? Because they've already said they want to dismiss us, to leave us without work. For investigating. Why aren't all of us researchers coming together? We were just criticizing the doctors. I also criticize my own field, the scientists. How can it be that there aren't more scientists searching for the truth? And when we requested studies from various centers, also from CONICET and universities, in Salta, in Bariloche, in Mar del Plata, they told us, oh no, but yes, to study the COVID vaccines, no. But why not? It's not forbidden. Who told you it was forbidden? There's an intrinsic fear that's part of this programming.
Certainly, where
Is there the cognitive bias that makes us believe and not want to step out of line, not wanting to leave our comfort zone. I ask everyone from shopkeepers to plumbers, anyone has something to contribute and to inform themselves. Get informed and demand. Tell me in writing. Where is the law? Where is the leaflet? I want a doctor to tell me. This was an experimental trial. It should have been overseen by doctors. Well, there's a lot to say. They should never have manufactured those millions of doses in December 2020 for the whole world because the pharmaceutical industry's machinery simply can't cope.
Without doubt, there wasn't enough time. The process couldn't be done.
The process couldn't be done, neither scientifically nor industrially.
Without a doubt.
So all of this was orchestrated. As we're saying, for several decades they've been imposing things. First swine flu, then this, before that the...
Look, to put it in an understandable example, it's like inviting people over for a barbecue at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and at 1 o'clock I'm just lighting the fire. I mean, there's simply not enough time for people to eat at 1.
Of course. That's why all the professionals know it. So that's why the entire medical and scientific industry. So we all need to speak out. In my opinion, we should not necessarily be afraid of losing our jobs. Please, this is serious. It's a crime against humanity.
Without a doubt.
Those who are complicit and stay silent will also, at some point, have to pay.
Without a doubt. Marcela obviously will stay in touch, both on my own behalf and on behalf of many people who are surely on the other side. Thank you, and thanks to everyone who has worked to uncover, to find out, to try to understand and communicate what was in those vaccines that were given to humanity. Because, I mean, this wasn't by chance, and I think it also caused a lot of harm beyond what the illness itself may have been. I'm not sure if the cure wasn't worse than the disease. As they say, the cure was worse than the disease.
Yes, the number of deaths says it all. The number of deaths has increased worldwide since 2021. In other words, they're achieving what they wanted, reducing the population. It increased. In 2020, there weren't more deaths. It started in 2021, and mortality, illnesses keep rising, and birth rates are dropping.
Without a doubt. Well, big hugs. I'm here if you need anything. Thank you very much.
Visit our website where you'll find a wealth of useful information, laresistencia.lime.
Big hugs. I'm here if you need anything. See you later. Well, there we were, talking with the doctor, Dr. Marcela Sangorrín, who is a biologist, a CONICET researcher, and was one of the people involved in the whole process of deciphering what the COVID vaccines contained. Because a lot was said about whether they're good, whether they're bad, whether they contained nothing. Just get the jab. The vaccine will be better than the illness. Every vaccine can have a side effect. Many people played it down, you know. And when I say many, I'm talking about people in healthcare, not even those who might not be in the field, you know. Well, we obviously thank you for the tremendous work you did and for understanding that the COVID vaccines from almost all the labs, as was just mentioned, and this is proven, you know. This isn't just an opinion or someone throwing an idea out there. It's been certified by the courts. It's been proven what the vaccines contained. Loads of elements, like bromine, like lithium, like copper, for example, as well as uranium. One wonders, what were they putting together? An atomic bomb to give to people? That's just unbelievable. Ross now, thank you for joining us in the dough. Until next time, bye.
Empower Translations. Translations for all humanity.